No one tells you how to survive your boss. College surely doesn't teach it. HR is never going to warn you. And by the time you realize what's happening, it's already too late. I used to be naive. I thought business was simple. I thought we were all here to make money and do all of our actions with the pursuit of money. But I was wrong. I didn't factor in ego. I didn't factor in emotions. I didn't factor in all of these other items that people bring to work with them. And let me tell you, I learned the hard way just how far some people will go to feed their ego, even if they destroy their own company in the process. And what's the worst part? No one warns you about this. No one tells you that your career won't just depend on your hard work, but it ultimately depends on your boss, their mood swings, their power plays, and whether or not you know how to navigate them. There's this term in the corporate world called green, and it's what people use to refer to people who are fresh to the workforce. And it really pisses me off that we say this, because we refer to all of this fresh talent as green. And green, all it means is just that corporate hasn't broken your spirit yet, which is ridiculous. So instead of helping our predecessors, instead of preparing people as they navigate this crazy landscape or the wild, wild west that is corporate, we gatekeep. We decide that we want them to learn on their own. And so that's why this podcast exists. I don't want to gatekeep, and I don't want to have the world be so overly complicated for no reason. And I think I've learned my lesson enough where I can help other people get ahead in their own careers. So welcome to How to Survive Your Boss, the only podcast preparing you to juggle corporate politics, mental health, and all of the things they don't teach you in school about working. You're in the right place if you are a student or a new graduate that's entering the workforce and has no idea what to expect. Potentially you are someone stuck with a nightmare boss right now, and you're wondering, is it just me or is this insane? Or even you might be a manager trying to break the cycle of bad leadership and learn and get better at managing your own talent. In any case, I welcome you. Here, we have no gatekeeping, no sugarcoating, no BS, just real talk about surviving corporate politics. I'm your host, Kiana Namoto, and for this initial episode, I want to explain why I'm here. So to go into my story, I was raised in a traditional business family. I learned how to participate in business from a very young age. I remember when my dad was a VP or something like that, and we would go on business trips, me, my mom, and my dad. And it was funny because we all had a role to play. My dad would, of course, handle closing the business with the man. My mother would entertain the wife. And I, of course, would play around with the kids and entertain the kids. And so I really, from a young age, I learned so much about how business operates. And because it was with a Japanese company, I think there was a lot more respect and integrity than I see in some other cultures. But at the end of the day, it's still business. So I did have a leg up when I stepped in the corporate world, but guess what? It was still a hot mess. I've worked for mediocre bosses at best, and sometimes actual psychopaths at worst. In contrast, it did give me a huge passion to become an excellent manager. And sure, I've made many mistakes being a new manager in the workforce, but I've managed global teams across crises, wars, and even political turmoil. And because of all of this, I've seen firsthand how bad leadership and broken systems can destroy people. And ultimately, even though I was able to achieve a lot in my career, I managed to build a 9-figure business. I've grown multiple startups. I reached executive level by the time I was 25, and I even hit that 6-figure salary only a year into the workforce. But despite all of this, I did it with not the best managers. Sure, not all of them were horrible, but in so many ways, I can't imagine what I would have accomplished had I had a great boss who was not only supporting my growth, but at least not working against me. And so why this podcast is focusing on your boss? Well, ultimately, they're the starting point. You can't even begin to think about corporate politics, networking, or a career strategy until you figure out how to manage your boss. A boss is a gatekeeper to your career growth. They're the thing that stands in between pay raises, job security, and frankly, your day-to-day sanity. If you don't understand how to navigate your boss's moods, expectations, and various hidden power plays, you're already at a disadvantage, and you haven't even started to look at the broader office politics. Unlike coworkers, you're not going to be able to work around your boss. They have direct control over your career, and it's a huge power imbalance. The Workforce Institute conducted a global study across 10 countries and over 3,000 people, and they found that 69% of employees say managers impact their mental health, which is a greater impact than doctors at 51% or therapists at 41%. And even the same as an employee's spouse or partner at 69% as well. Frankly, I'd argue that it's probably higher because your manager controls your livelihood. So they stand in between you and food and shelter and security. And the daily stress levels and work environment can have such an impact on your mental stability. And frankly, I've also lived it. When I was working under a psychopath, it didn't just mess with my head. It started to destroy my body. My body was shutting down. It was one of the scariest times in my life. I wasn't sleeping. I was barely getting maybe 4 hours of sleep a night. And when I did, I would always wake up at 3 a.m. drenched in sweat. And I don't mean hot, sleep hot, take a blanket off sweat. I mean, my clothes were visibly soaked. I had to completely change, and I was sleeping in towels, wondering why nobody has invented a towel blanket. And on top of all of this, I couldn't even eat spicy food. My body had shut down so much and was responding to this stress so viscerally that I couldn't even eat buldak ramen, because if I had spicy food, I would get what I refer to as the spicy sweats, which are substantially worse than the regular sweats because it is a cold, hot sweat that is utterly painful and maximum uncomfortableness for your entire body. And so this constant stress that my body was in and constantly trying to notify me that something's wrong. But I had been in it for so long, I just wasn't necessarily sure what was happening. But this all came from the constant stress, gaslighting, and workplace abuse that I was dealing with every single day. And yet, when people talk about bad bosses, they act like it's something that's an annoyance. They don't want to talk about it. I remember reaching out to many colleagues after my experience, and many of them were kind of, coy. They said, "Oh, Kiana, we don't need to talk about it. It's fine." And I was like, what the fuck? No, let's please talk about it, because not talking about it is exactly how this behavior continues. And I'm not here to protect my old shitty boss. That's not my job. He could destroy your mental health, right? A bad boss can ruin your confidence. It literally made me sick. And if you don't know how to spot these signs or how to protect yourself, you might not even realize what's happening until you're too deep. At least that was the case for me. So that's why this podcast exists. Because before you can win at work, you have to survive your boss. Period. So why do we stay in toxic jobs? How is it possible that smart, capable people put up with terrible bosses, bad work environments, and corporate BS, sometimes for years? I think the answer is simple, or at least after deep reflection on myself, I see some patterns. But the biggest thing is we don't see it for what it is. And by the time we do, we're already in too deep. So here's a couple reasons why I think this continues. Number one, we tend to normalize it. If you're someone like me who kind of had a chaotic home growing up and you were surrounded by dysfunction, manipulation, or control, then that becomes your baseline for normal. You don't see a toxic work environment as toxic. You see it as familiar. And your brain starts to mistake this familiar place for safety. And I think it's why when you're raised in such a tough house, in such a tough place, when you get into a workplace like this, it can feel comfortable. It can feel familiar. And you feel like you know how to navigate it so you can tolerate it. But at the end of the day, you're putting yourself through hell. Another reason is just in general society. You know, we're so conditioned to be grateful to have any job at all, you know, and I think there's this idea that we should put companies before ourselves, which is crazy sauce. But at the end of the day, right, I remember my grandpa telling me, you know, oh, don't complain about a job. Like, be happy you have a job. Be so grateful that you have work. Other people don't have work. And as much as I can accept the privilege and the pleasure of having steady income, it also makes us delusional to put up with a bunch of bullshit that we should never have put up with in the first place. We're taught to be team players, hard worker, you know, always be grateful. Don't complain. If you complain, you make it worse. But also, if you don't complain, if you don't point it out, you know what happens? You end up bullying yourself. And so this mindset keeps you stuck. And we continue to work harder in a system that exploits its workers. And I've spent years believing that if I just worked harder, my situation would improve. I thought, man, if I just meet my boss's expectations, he'll get off my jockstrap and I'll be able to smooth sailing into the future. Spoiler alert, that never happened because I didn't realize my boss wasn't invested in my success. He was only invested in his own and protecting his own image. And he was actively sabotaging me the whole time. So toxic workplaces, what's another reason we stay here? Well, my third reason is that we start to think we are the problem. And I think toxic workplaces themselves have cultures that gaslight you and kind of put you in these buckets where you really think you're the only problem in this situation. I know from my experience, I've worked with multiple executive coaches. I've read so many books on leadership and best practices and coaching and how to be coachable and, you know, from both ends of it. And they all say many of the same things, right? But one of the biggest one is when something goes wrong, the first place you need to look is yourself. You need to take radical accountability and focus on what you can control. And since you can only control yourself, you should just focus on yourself. But here's the problem with that. In a workplace, we do not control the majority of things that happen to us. There are company policies, there are company processes, there are procedures that live completely outside of us, right? I like to refer to these things as systems. The systems that live around us are oftentimes a huge contributor to the outcomes that happen at work. So if some crazy shit happens and you sit here and you're like, oh my God, what could I have done better? How could I have been nicer? Or how could I have given better vocal feedback? At the end of the day, you're going to continue to spiral in your thoughts because you haven't even looked at the system. And maybe the system was built against you. And so it is great advice in some ways. Yes, you can only control yourself. Yes, you know, you need to take radical accountability in the workplace in order to drive extreme success and extreme results. But this mentality can easily be weaponized against you. And frankly, I fell very victim to this weapon where I spent so much time focused on what am I doing in this situation? How can I improve my approach? How can I improve my tactics? And at the end of the day, I was so freaking busy paying attention to myself. What I didn't pay attention to was my psychopath boss. And he was indeed the problem the entire time. So Corporate culture, it thrives on shifting blame downwards. If something goes wrong, it's never going to be poor leadership. It's never going to be bad company politics. It's always going to somehow be an employee's fault. And if you believe that, you'll stay in bad jobs questioning yourself, questioning your work, and you'll never realize that the system was rigged from the start. There's a popular saying that I love. It's called, "The fish rots at the head." And the reason I love this is because your environment and culture is set by the leaders of your company, and it trickles down to every employee. And being at the top, I saw just how much shitty leadership equals a shitty workplace environment. So breaking the cycle, how do we get out of this? Well, the truth is, most of us don't even realize how toxic a job was until we're out of it. And only when you step away do you see how much stress you normalized, how you compromised your mental health, and how much you put up with that was never okay to begin with. And the key to recognizing the signs before you hit the ground, and the key to recognizing the signs before you hit your breaking point is exactly what we're here to talk about. I want to help the world see what I couldn't see, and I want to help other people know that they're not alone in this, because it happens so much more than you think. Frankly, this is the biggest elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. How to Survive Your Boss is so much more than just a podcast. I can't think of a single TV show that doesn't have some form of a bad boss dynamic. Yet, nobody talks about these stories, and this information stays within the, experienced few who have had their spirits broken. And so the way I see it, if our society wants new talent to learn the hard way, then I don't want to be a part of that same society. And I'm going to start my own. And that's what we're doing here. I refuse to be a part of those trends. And although I mentor at my old college and I try to work with as many people as I can, just sharing these life stories, sharing this advice, it's not enough. It's too big. This is bigger than me. This is bigger than this podcast. This is such a crazy, I think, social construct. Sometimes I think those TV shows have these horrible boss dynamics just to condition us to believe that it's normal and it's okay to have a really, really crappy boss your whole life. And at the end of the day, it's not worth it. I know now that I'm out and I am away from such a toxic workplace, like I have never been happier. And I get to dive deep into what I love, which is this, not just talking about how bad a workplace is or any of those things, but truly the psychology behind it. Truly, I used to tell my employees, I still say this all the time, your mental health shows up with you to work. And it's my obsession now, I have ADHD. I have all of these little quirks about me that show up to work with me every single day when I have a meeting, when I take 5 years to respond to an email, when I forget that I have a meeting. All of those things are a part of how my mental health is helping me to become not only the person I'm supposed to be, but also how it's impacting my day-to-day work. I'm constantly researching, learning, and analyzing corporate dynamics. And also just in general, I find psychology, specifically narcissism, but all other mental health forms as well, fascinating. And How to Survive Your Boss is just as much about me learning to better my own future as it is helping everyone else learn to better their future. I never want to repeat the same mistakes, and I want to give others the tools to avoid them as well. And along the way, I hope I get to speak with a bunch of experts and create a space for other experienced professionals to share their knowledge, experiences, and ultimately start a conversation that's much needed. So, why we need to fix this system before it breaks us? Well, the way I see it is we have all of these great initiatives in the world today, but they don't really land. One of those is DEI, diversity and inclusion efforts. Now, these are really great in the sense of it has the right idea. Let's get a diverse workforce, other opinions matter, all of that's very true. But the problem with DEI is it tries to fix the problem too late. And the real issue starts so much more before that. In life, I believe that there are two kinds of knowledge, really. You have academia, which is really what the government provides you, and this only teaches you the info you need to basically become a production machine, right? Be a cog in the wheel, in the machine of, producing corporate results. And then there's the other half of knowledge, arguably the more important half, where you learn how to life, how to love, how to adult, and even how to pay your taxes and things like this. And that side of your knowledge all comes down to who your parents are and what your environment is. It's the ultimate privilege or oppression. I like to say that I was personally bred in captivity because it's been my whole life, and I like to say that I was bred in captivity for business just because of my environment and my parents, and really the way that I grew up in this world. When I'm with my family, we talk about stocks. More recently, we talk about crypto, mergers, taxes, bankruptcies, managing teams, and in general, all things to do with money. My grandparents literally used to pay me when I was in elementary school to send them emails, and I would get paid extra to include attachments. My extracurriculars included Japanese lessons, golf, cello, choir, which AKA is really just karaoke for Japanese business. And honestly, I'm so privileged. I have no debt because I paid for college using a 529 account, which is a tax-savvy way to put away money for school that I am so privileged to have had because my grandpa knew business. I mentioned before, my dad used to travel on business trips with me and my mom, and I have always been a part of closing deals. I literally had investment accounts before I could talk. And I even managed to pick a college with a robust mentoring program that really blessed me with multiple incredible mentors. And of course, in my career, I also experienced executive coaches that have made such a difference in my career. Most people don't have this. I know that. I know this is my privilege. And that's why I want to share my extreme knowledge with the world. I am fully aware that other children are not born into the same circumstances. Let's say you're born into a drug family. You're surely not discussing stock options at the dinner table. And what's worse is the world gaslights us by telling people that, because the internet's here, all the information you could ever need is out there. It's like, okay, if you don't know what you're looking for, how the hell are you supposed to find it? I remember when I was mentoring incoming freshmen as a senior in college as a part of this mentor program. And the mentors were instructed to ask mentees what they would like to get out of the relationships and what they needed help with. To me, I was like, WTF. Obviously, it was easy for students to ask for things like, I need help enrolling in classes, or what courses do you recommend for this major? Because those are immediate problems right in their face. But how could they have ever asked for help with setting up mock interviews if they didn't even know what mock interviews were? Anyways, my privilege obviously propelled my career for a multitude of reasons, and being in a professional setting was always my norm. And although it didn't prepare me for psychopaths that I would encounter along the way, that was ultimately because every generation before me didn't even know what mental health was. And I think we're really starting to see a shift in today's landscape. This is why Gen Z and younger generations are struggling to really adapt in today's corporate world. You see, Gen X and boomers, everybody before us, right? They didn't know about mental health. Their mentality in life was work until you die, persevere at all costs. If you're not dead, you didn't try hard enough. And millennials, we were raised by these individuals, but we really discovered mental health. And we leaned in deep. Many of us have made our mental health our identities, and we have such a deep understanding for this, right? But at the core, millennials are still programmed to hustle. And this is where it starts to get tricky because millennials raised Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And so for the first time ever, we have generations that both at their core and at their worldview prioritize mental health over work and accomplishment and achievement. You hear all these stories about Gen Z struggling to stay in the workplace, or, internships not working out great. And this is because, this new generation is really starting to fully reject toxic work practices, and they're opting for immediate life enjoyment versus early life suffering for future enjoyment. And so I think that's where the friction comes from. Obviously, this is just me and my ADHD pattern detection, but that's what I'm really starting to lean into. And I want to understand, how can we better transition these future generations? How can we open the door to these conversations? Because trends like quiet quitting or silent vacationing, these did not exist back in the day. And I suspect we're going to have a lot more of them in the future. Anyways, while greed will always continue for these companies, and we will always need to defend ourselves, all of the trust and foundations that used to exist have really died. You don't see the same, let's say, benefits that you used to see back in the day. Back in the day, corporate America, at least specifically, would have large pensions. They had all of these retirement plans. You were truly encouraged to stay at a company for the entirety of your life. In today's world, that's a joke. I quite literally hear from, anybody who's in the corporate space. Change jobs every 2 years. If you change your job every 2 years, this is how you're going to get the best, pay, best benefits. You'll move up. You'll do all these things. 2 years is nothing, mind you. Changing a job every 2 years is kind of crazy. But in today's world, it's the only thing that makes sense because there's no trust between companies and their employees. And the greed, like I said, it only continues to get worse. And the top 1% will always exploit their talent to fill their pockets. And so in today's world, you got layoffs more common than, bonuses. And there's gig work. Contracting is starting to boom. And in general, self-sufficiency with people doing small things on their own or startup businesses continue to rise. So the bottom line, you don't know what you don't know. And if you're a college kid just trying to feed themselves and pass classes, corporate survival is surely not on your radar. We are here to teach what you don't know. And we know you need to know. And this is all so that you can successfully navigate corporate life. How to Survive Your Boss isn't just a drama show that's shitting on bad leadership, as entertaining as that is. It's really about helping people and helping them understand how to navigate the system before it screws them over. How to Survive Your Boss aims to prepare our listeners with tools and tactics to protect themselves, pivot when needed, and take control of their careers instead of waiting for a company to take care of them. So what can you expect going forward? Well, for season 1, we're going to start with the basics to help our listeners know simply what they don't know. Covering key relationship milestones that you have your boss. Covering key relationship milestones you and your boss will have. Anything from an interview to getting fired. Just so that you know what corporate lingo means, what you can expect, and really what red flags to look for. And all of this is going to teach you how to really start thinking and approaching these various different obstacles that will come in your career. No gatekeeping, no sugarcoating, and no BS. Just real, raw corporate education and survival strategies. Over time, the goal is to cover real workplace horror stories, psychological survival skills, and hear from experts to help our listeners outsmart bad bosses, protect their mental health, and thrive in an evolving work landscape. Because the best way to survive your boss is to learn the game before they play you. Because trust me, one day, one of them will. I look forward to learning and growing with all of you. Cheers.